Washington had been holding the line outside Boston for months, low on supplies, bleeding men to expired enlistments, keeping the British at bay through positioning and the memory of Bunker Hill more than any real strength. He needed something to break the stalemate. What he got was a bookseller who taught himself artillery from the books he sold, and an idea that sounded impossible. Henry Knox was 25 years old. He'd run a bookshop in Boston and spent years studying military science on his own, drilling with local militia, and developing a genuine expertise in artillery, all before the war began. Now he volunteered to drag 60 tons of captured British cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, 300 miles, in winter, through the Berkshire Mountains. It took 2 months. His men floated cannons across lakes, hauled them over frozen passes on ox-drawn sleds, and lost one through the ice. But by early March 1776, the guns were in position on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the entire British fleet in Boston Harbor. The British watched the fortifications go up overnight and couldn't stop it. By morning, General Hale faced a choice he'd been dreading: storm the heights the way he'd stormed Bunker Hill, or give up Boston entirely. A planned British counterattack was disrupted by weather before it could launch. Hale chose to leave. On March 17th, the British evacuated Boston. It was Washington's first major strategic victory as commander, and for a brief moment, it felt like the revolution might actually work. Meanwhile, far to the north, Benedict Arnold's invasion of Canada had collapsed in a freezing disaster outside Quebec, a reminder that the war was going badly almost everywhere else. It wouldn't feel like victory again for a long time. In January, Thomas Paine had published Common Sense, 47 pages arguing that America didn't just deserve better treatment from Britain, it deserved to be its own country. The pamphlet spread everywhere. By summer, the question was no longer whether to declare independence, but when. On July 2nd, Congress voted. 2 days later, they adopted the Declaration, and with that, the stakes changed completely. This wasn't a dispute over taxes anymore. Every man who signed that document was now a traitor to the crown. There was no going back. Washington didn't have long to absorb that, because the British were coming with everything. In late August, over 32,000 troops landed on Long Island, the largest overseas expeditionary force Britain had assembled to that date. Washington's forces in the area were significantly outnumbered and spread across positions they couldn't effectively defend. On August 27th, the trap closed. The British flanked the American left through an unguarded pass. The forward American positions collapsed. Washington lost roughly 2,000 men killed, wounded, or captured in a single day. But what happened next revealed something about Washington that the British kept underestimating. On the night of August 29th, he ordered a full evacuation across the East River to Manhattan. Every available boat was pressed into service, anchored by Glover's Marblehead Regiment, experienced mariners and fishermen who rowed thousands of soldiers through the darkness, trip after trip, alongside other units manning anything that could float. By morning, a fog rolled in and covered the last crossings. The British advanced to find empty trenches. Washington had saved his army. But he was learning a hard lesson. He couldn't beat the British in a straight fight. Not yet. Manhattan became a scramble. The British kept pushing and Washington kept retreating, north through the island, losing skirmishes, losing ground, losing men. In the middle of it, a 21-year-old school teacher named Nathan Hale volunteered to spy behind British lines. He was inexperienced and captured quickly, reportedly with incriminating notes still on his person. On September 22nd, he was hanged. Hale's last words became legend. His mission was a complete failure. But in the fall of 1776, failure was becoming the pattern. Then came November, and the worst blow yet. Fort Washington sat on Manhattan's northern tip, a strong point that was supposed to hold. Washington's generals were split. Nathanael Greene argued forcefully that the fort could be defended. Others wanted to abandon it. Washington wavered between the two, and while he hesitated, the decision was made for him. On November 16th, the British stormed it. Nearly 3,000 Americans were captured in a single afternoon. It was Washington's worst defeat of the war, and it carried his name. This one cut deep. Washington hadn't just lost a battle. He'd failed to make the call when making the call still mattered. The commander who had bluffed the British out of Boston now looked like a man overwhelmed by the scale of what he was facing. And he wasn't done losing. The retreat across New Jersey was the lowest point of the American Revolution. Washington's army marched south through freezing rain and mud, the British close behind. Men deserted by the hundreds. They had no winter clothing. Many had no shoes. Loyalist sentiment surged in the towns they passed through. Some residents were actively swearing oaths of allegiance to the crown. By early December, what remained crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. Washington ordered every boat on the river seized or destroyed so the British couldn't follow. Then he counted what he had left. Fewer than 3,000 men fit for duty. 6 months earlier, he'd commanded over 20,000. And there was a deadline. Most remaining enlistments expired on December 31st. If nothing changed, Washington wouldn't just have a smaller army, he'd have no army at all. Other militia forces existed across the colonies, but the Continental Army, the backbone of the Revolution, would dissolve, not from a British victory, but from a stack of expired contracts. On December 19th, Thomas Paine published The American Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls. It was read aloud to troops camped along the Delaware, men who were cold, hungry, and counting the days until they could legally walk away. Washington sat with that and made a decision. The plan was to cross the Delaware on Christmas night and hit the Hessian garrison at Trenton at dawn. 3 columns would cross at 3 points. Washington's main force at McConkey's Ferry, with supporting crossings under Generals Ewing and Cadwalader farther south. Ewing's crossing failed entirely. Cadwalader got part of his force across but couldn't move his artillery over the ice and turned back. Only Washington's column made it. 2,400 men, 18 cannons, and horses, ferried through a nor'easter in the dead of night. Glover's Marblehead men were at the oars once again, leading the same kind of desperate water crossing they'd pulled off at Long Island. They landed on the Jersey side around 3 a.m., hours behind schedule. The dawn surprise was no longer possible. Washington reportedly said, "Press on." He split his force into 2 columns and marched 9 miles through sleet and snow toward Trenton. The attack hit at about 8 a.m. on December 26th. The Hessians, roughly 1,400 strong, were caught off guard, not because they were drunk from Christmas, as the myth goes, but because a combination of the storm, exhaustion, and sheer disbelief that this broken army could still mount an offensive had left them exposed. Their regular patrols had been scaled back. No one expected an attack in that weather. No one expected this army was still capable of one. The battle lasted about 90 minutes. Around 22 Hessians were killed, including their commander, Colonel Rahl. Nearly 900 were captured. American combat deaths were minimal, though more men suffered from exposure on the brutal march itself. 6 months of defeats, Long Island, Manhattan, Fort Washington, New Jersey, had convinced the British that the rebellion was collapsing under its own weight. And they were nearly right. Washington's army wasn't being destroyed by British generals. It was being killed by calendars, shoe leather, and frozen feet. But Trenton changed the equation. It wasn't just a morale boost. It destabilized the entire British winter position in New Jersey, forced General Howe to rethink his campaign, and set up a second American strike at Princeton just days later. The momentum reversed so quickly that the British pulled back across most of the state they just conquered. More than anything, it bought Washington time. Enough men re-enlisted to hold the Continental Army together into 1777. The Revolution didn't end on December 31st. It survived by days.